Chapter 39. Jane Merrian said little to Martin James, all the way from Plaswen-Las to Llyn Castle. It was true that the steady chunter of the Land Rover's diesel engine was not exactly conducive to conversation. But Martin was feeling tired, and the presence of another lively person would have helped. As it was, he had never seen Jane Merrian so controlled, so seemingly indifferent to the usual stimuli. She did not remark on the route, which despite the darkness was an interesting one, descending 1,000 feet down to sea level where the castle was, and, as so often in Wales, going through several distinct landscapes in a relatively short distance. Neither did she have anything to say when he asked her if she minded whether he had the radio on. It was as if, for the moment, she was perfectly content to exist in a controlled silence of her own making. So it was that Martin, when he turned the Land Rover into the gravelled forecourt area in front of Llyn Castle, found himself listening to the fading strains of the drinking song in Puccini's La Bohème. He turned off the radio almost immediately. The music seemed incongruous in the circumstances, and the need for distraction had ended. He pulled the Land Rover in behind a row of 3 police cars that were parked by a wall that surrounded the castle grounds. Jane Merrian, as if guided by some innate maternal sense, immediately got out, went over to the last patrol car in line, found her daughter sitting in the front seat, and was immediately reunited with her, all without saying a word. Just as Martin was looking past the 2 embracing women in the foreground, someone switched on 2 powerful searchlights that were mounted on tripods just inside the curtain walls of the castle. Now, for the first time, in an overbright reflected whiteness, Martin watched as the 2 beams crisscrossed each other and then separated, showing up in stark detail the heavy, cumbersome stonework of the castle walls. Then the lights came together high up and revealed 2 men trying to shield their eyes from the glare. Martin immediately recognized the man in front. The mass of curly ginger hair and the rather stocky frame locked into a pugnacious attitude couldn't belong to anyone else. Gwendraeth James. So the man immediately behind him must be his sergeant, Harry Warden, Martin thought, though the latter wasn't immediately recognizable. The lights moved on, and a few moments later located a different pair of men locked in a struggle for dominance. The large figure in a suit Martin identified straight away, despite the fact he'd only seen him a couple of times. It was his second cousin, Wyndham Spencer James. He was now defending himself against a determined onslaught by a smaller man in a combat jacket and flat hat, who had to be David Young, and who seemed to be holding something against his body, even as he drove the other towards a place on the battlements where repair work had recently been carried out. The 2 men were now standing on a boarded scaffolding, rocking together in their struggle 300 feet above the river and a mixed crowd of spectators, who now included several policemen, Samantha Merriam and her mother, and a knot of people from the nearby cottages. It could not be long. The platform was too narrow, the struggle too intense. Martin watched as the 2 struggling men changed positions for a moment. Wyndham Spencer James seemed to gain the upper hand, and then David Young made his final move. There was a shout, and Harry Warden pushed past Gwendraeth James, and for a crazy moment teetered on the edge of the battlements himself. Then the two others went sailing into the air, grappling as they fell. The searchlight beam followed them down, the intense white light like a physical presence in itself. When the sound came, it was a sickening, dull thud. Martin James waited a few moments. Then, moving past Samantha Merriam's familiar but now totally separate presence, pushed his way through the small group of spectators and through the gate in the curtained wall of the castle. Two officers, whom he didn't know, were kneeling over the bodies. David Young was underneath, and his head was a pulpy mess where it had hit a rock. He was obviously dead. Wyndham Spencer James had been face down on top of him, his larger bulk concealing the details of the other body. When the two officers gently turned him over to see if he was still breathing, Martin saw something caught between the two men. It was about a foot high and looked like the perfectly preserved model of a skeleton.